So, why are some disasters so bad? There are quite a few factors that come into play. One of those is just the size of the event. Think about that recent earthquake in Michigan, for example. It was relatively small, and there just wasn't really any damage to report. Clearly, the more humans and buildings or other property in an area, the greater the potential for deaths and damage. For example, if an earthquake occurs in a remote area in Alaska, even if the earthquake itself is pretty large, it probably won't be that bad of an event because there isn't really anything there to damage in terms of us thinking about natural disasters as having an impact on people's lives or property values. Feedback cycles can create situations that make human communities much more vulnerable to natural disasters, and I'll show you an example in the next few slides. And another major factor is that natural disasters can interact with other events, either things that would normally be occurring at that time, or they can cause a cascade of other natural disasters. And this leads to a much larger overall expected impact. So these are some of the main reasons why some natural disasters can have such a huge impact and some natural disasters really don't have any impact at all. Feedback loops are really important, especially because of how they interact with socioeconomic factors that are part of society and culture. Here's how a feedback cycle works. It's basically where something influences something else, it influences something else, something else, something else, and then ultimately ends up back influencing that original thing. I'm going to give you an example of feedback cycles using tornado impacts. A recent study found that the two biggest factors related to tornado fatalities were housing quality and income level. Mobile homes, such as what's seen here damaged after a tornado, are well known for their susceptibility to tornadoes. At the same time, they're also often the only home that many low-income families might be able to afford. So these low-income communities can be disproportionately affected by a tornado event. Any savings that they have are used to recover rather than putting that income to other uses that might help improve their quality of life. So their income generating capacity has gone down and their economic outlook may have decreased. Thus, they remain in poverty and remain vulnerable to the next natural disaster that might occur in their community. Natural disasters are also connected and have different cascading effects as well. How are natural disasters interconnected? Earthquakes can cause tsunamis, for example. Volcanic eruptions can cause landslides. Hurricanes can cause flooding. If we added wildfires to this diagram, where do you think they would be and what would they be connected to? This diagram helps illustrate that there may be more than one actual hazard at any one time, and that any one hazard could actually immediately trigger another one. These can be called cascading natural disasters. Natural disasters can also interact with normal phenomena. One of your assignments this week is to explore how a hurricane that makes landfall at low tide would have a different impact than a hurricane that makes landfall at high tide. Because interactions between events can amplify the effects and the impacts of natural disasters, it's important to kind of keep all these connections in mind. You can't just study the natural disaster, you have to study the larger context in which it's occurring. The risk of these interacting and cascading natural disasters is on the rise. The photo here is from a major mudslide that occurred in California a few years ago. 1 month before this landslide, the soil on the town's steep slopes were destabilized in a wildfire. When landscapes are charred during wildfires and lose the vegetation that stabilizes the soil, they become much more vulnerable to landslides after rainfall. After a storm brought torrential downpours, a 5-meter high wave of mud, tree branches, and boulders swept down the slopes and into people's homes. This debris flow landslide killed 21 people and injured more than 160. Thus, natural disasters can be a complex problem that involves both the natural world as well as socioeconomic factors that increase risks. As we continue to talk about these this semester, we'll be talking about both the natural processes as well as some of these other factors that contribute to damage and deaths.